Okay, so far, good. I believe we are live. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of WGNS podcast, weekly gaming news show. This is a group of us just get together, discuss news topics in gaming industry for the week. Joining me today will be my co-hosts Dylan and Julian.
Hey.
Hello.
And I guess we'll just jump right into it. Sound good to you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds pretty good.
All right, cool. So for the first topic of today, we have kind of this, anyone who tuned in to last week where they had the Xbox Live showcase where they were kind of showing off, the Xbox One's newer games that are coming out. They had shown a bunch of things, and one of them was Halo Infinite, and we finally got some like pretty decent actual representative gameplay. And it kind of unfortunately turns out it might not have been as representative as maybe it will be, because they've actually had to come and speak out about it. One of the problems that a lot of people were having was that it really kind of didn't look maybe what we would consider next gen, and there was a lot of upset about that, and a lot of people were kind of like, well, what's going on? And there's been a lot of back and forth amongst the community of what does next gen look like, and is graphics more important than aesthetics and such and such. And then Xbox kind of, or rather 343 kind of made their own statement about it, just to be I guess maybe clear the air. And really what it came down to, you can read the Halo Waypoint thing yourself or any of the articles on it, but essentially what they have sort of come to say is that it's a game that's a work in progress, and maybe what you saw wasn't completely indicative of what the game is actually going to look like. That being said, the game is clearly taking a new aesthetic turn. It is going in a completely different direction than maybe previous games, or at least re-changing the aesthetic. And what I've heard from some people is that, or from some people talking about that, is that their vision was more to go back to the classic Halo look, which is an interesting one to me, just because it's hard to describe that, since classic Halo, Combat Evolved, came out so long ago on the original Xbox, and what they were kind of going for was a bit more of a realistic graphical look for the time, at least. So I thought that comment was kind of interesting, but overall I don't think that the aesthetic choice that they're making was bad in this. It was actually more, for me, clear graphical problems that they were having. Like, there was pop-in. Like, there was the scene where you're going up an elevator and all the mountains in the distance kind of pop in and something like that, especially on the thing that confuses me is that this was, they had to have known that this was coming, this live stream, this showcase. They had to have known that that Xbox wanted them to show here. And what I'm concerned about is, yes, games are being worked on until the moment that they release, and then obviously nowadays even past the moment that they release. But with a game that's been worked on for about 5 years and is coming out in a few months, less than 6 months, because it's gonna be a launch title, they say. So it's supposed to be coming out sometime by the end of this year, and we're in the 8th month of this year. I don't really know what that says about what it's gonna, like, the polished state it's gonna be in when it releases. Because again, new graphical or new style direction is fine. I'm totally fine with the way it looks. Some people are really bothered by it. I think it looks pretty good. but the lack of, like the lack of polish with all the pop in, the foliage didn't look particularly amazing, and things like the lighting, especially when they've specifically talked about ray tracing, there definitely was not any ray tracing being done in the demo that they showed. And just things like that, maybe like particle effects when he was throwing grenades, or like you could pick up those like battery cells and throw them and stuff. And all the alien weaponry, like you would just expect so much more out of it, especially again for a next gen title. So like, barring all the comments about aesthetics, like even with a style change, you can have a stylistic game that has like all of these graphical things that you've kind of been talking about anyways, right?
Hmm.
So that's really just that was my take on it. I don't know how you guys feel. I'm not sure if y'all actually ended up watching
I
the
did
Halo
not.
thing.
I did not. But I don't know. It makes me wonder, like, how far along do they actually start working on graphics and polish? It makes me think that, like, it's just like that's a last minute kind of thing, right? But I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It it's weird. I'm not really keen on the development process, but um, yeah, it is kind of worrying that they would do that. And I think that the whole finishing games after you release them is kind of a shame, but unfortunately that's the way that it's been going the past, like, what, decade or something.
Yeah, I mean it it's one of those complicated issues, right? Where we want games to be able to be better even post launch. Like, yeah, I mean, the thing is, games used to come out all the time and be buggy, right? So if you can fix that later, that's great. You know, if a game if a game was going to come out and there's potentially something that you just had to have missed, and you have the chance to fix it later, that's awesome. But that shouldn't be an excuse to slouch and release a game that, it's like, we should look at the state games are in and like go back to PS2 eras and been like, could we have released this knowing that we could never change it? you know
Mm.
would that have been acceptable? Because yeah, there were always bugs, but they were, they had a certain level of quality where they would, everyone was fine with them. I don't remember ever really playing a game that had game breaking bugs, and I know they existed, but back on the PS2 and original Xbox era, like, they games were fine. They were in such a good
Yeah,
state for what they were, and the bugs
I don't
just were
remember
charming.
anything being bad. Yeah.
What's your take on it, Julian?
Well, as far as, of course, like, I saw little snippets of it, like, of course, as I was like, man, I was scrounging through Twitter, and of course, I went to YouTube, and I also watched a little bit of it as well. I would agree that it's more, there's no, I guess to me, it feels like when you, I just got done playing The Last of Us, and I'm currently playing Horizon, and I see these, like, current generation PS4 games being pushed out the way, and then I see Halo 5 in it. I mean, not Halo 5, Halo Infinite. It does push a bit of a concern, but they still have a few months to fix it, or maybe it was just a last minute thing they scrounged up because they might have forgotten they needed to do this. But I think they'll make it. I think it's gonna have to be crunch time for them, and I personally think that they can make it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. That's
Yeah,
really
so we can
really
do.
what it comes down to at the end of the day with these things.
Yeah.
Um, but for now, we'll move on. A little bit of more Halo news. Dylan, you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, Halo Infinite was debuted at the Xbox Game Showcase, and it was only for the campaign portion, and the multiplayer was absent. And funnily enough, Smith's Toys may have accidentally leaked details about the multiplayer, saying how it could be free to play and it might have a battle pass system. And right whenever people were debating it, Microsoft and comes in and confirms it. It's like, yeah, it's going to be free to play. Maybe I don't think the battle pass system was touched on, but yeah, it's. That brings up the question, though: if it's going to be free to play, the multiplayer, then how are they going to make profit off of it? kind of like, and I guess it's going to be sort of like Warzone, where Warzone itself is free to play, Call of Duty Warzone, and it's free to play, but they also have a battle pass system, and that's how they make a lot of money off of it. And I think it would make sense for Halo Infinite to have a battle pass system, even though sometimes it's seen as controversial. But I don't know. I'm fine with it. Mostly, what is it? Mostly, it's just cosmetic items, right? In battle pass systems, at least in Warzone. So I would expect Halo to be the same thing. But yeah, it's also touting supposed 120 FPS performance on the Xbox Series X, which is going to be really nice. And I don't know if most people have TVs that'll support that, but we'll see.
Yeah, newer TVs I know past couple of years or so have been allowing for that. TVs in the past have had like 120 FPS modes or 120 hertz modes, but they were either for 3D capabilities, or they had that, like, I don't know. TVs have a lot of weird technology in them, and they do those like interpolation things. So some of them had 120 hertz technically, but didn't actually, like, you couldn't game on it at 120 hertz if you plugged into your PC. So it's a bit all over the place with that. But newer TVs for sure. Like, I know LG's OLED lineup definitely does. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because I've heard this conversation about higher frame rates quite a lot on Xbox's side when talking about the Series X, and that's great. The ability to push higher frames is awesome, and one thing I would hope for is maybe if there's graphical settings now on console where it's like, hey, maybe I don't want to run it at 120 FPS. Maybe I only have a TV that has 60 FPS or 60 hertz on it, right? And I can only push 60 FPS and see it, although there is still benefits to going beyond that. But maybe I could turn up the ray tracing or particle physics or whatever maybe is going on, whatever they can do, maybe the lushness of the foliage or something, just something that they could boost up the graphical or the visual fidelity for a sacrifice of graphical performance that you wouldn't actually notice because your TV is lower frame rate anyways.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. It's going to also be interesting to see what people are using this on, because I'd say more people have high frame rate monitors than TVs for sure. So maybe people are just going to be plugging this into their monitor.
Yeah, that's what I do with my consoles. I play my PlayStation 3 and my PlayStation 4 on my console. On my monitor. That's actually funny because I was playing Ghost of Tsushima yesterday or a couple days ago, and I noticed that they have an option in the display settings for you can either prioritize greater FPS or you can do I assume fidelity, but that's only available on PS4 Pro models. But so I can't enable it, but that's kind of something similar to what you're talking about. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how many other games do that, but
yeah. It overall, I mean, good things. I think free to play is a good move. I think this might be the direction we see a lot of games do with their multiplayer, especially big franchises like this, because if I think what I've heard. So originally they had, Halo 1, 2, and 3, and then they had sort of a branch off with ODST, which was just like it was Halo 3, but it wasn't obviously it didn't even have Chief in it. And then there was Halo or you didn't play as Chief. And then there was Halo can't remember Reach, which was a prequel to the first 3 games. And then when 343 took over, kind of all this direction they were going in was that 4, 5, and 6, they had, I think it was like the Forerunner trilogy or something like that. So they were kind of thinking of it almost in the way people think of Star Wars, which is like they have the trilogies, they have the originals, the prequels, and then the new ones. And much like Star Wars, I'd say most people didn't like the newer two that had come out 4 and 5, and I think I think this was supposed to be 6, but I don't think Infinite is 6 necessarily. Like it is in terms of it's continuing the story, and I think it takes place at some point after 5. How far I don't know. The thing is, after 5, Chief was like safe on a human planet, and like there was this whole thing where the ending cutscene. I think if you beat it on Legendary, he takes off his helmet and you like see his eyes. And in the launch trailer for this, like the teaser trailer, they showed him floating in space, like cryo locked in his suit, and this guy, his buddy, rescues him. So something happened in between then. So I'm curious if this is supposed to be like, are they maybe taking some liberties and rebooting maybe at a new point, saying like hey, maybe some of these things didn't happen and we're just gonna jump into the story here, or even that like we're just gonna cut to the chase because we don't want to explain anything that's happened in between here, because it clearly doesn't feel like it's Halo 6. It feels like they're trying to go for something else.
Yeah.
So I'd be very interested to see how this affects things going forward. I think Warzone and this might set a really good precedent for a lot of games coming forward, where the games as a service is pretty real, and I am ultimately fine with having like battle pass systems and stuff like that if the game is free, as long as it doesn't affect gameplay and it is just cosmetics, like you said. But I would like to see, I would like to see a reason why it is like that, because if Call of Duty is $60 plus the battle passes for the multiplayer, I'm not paying $60 for that campaign. You know, it's a 4 or 5 hour campaign, and it's just not worth. I mean, you can argue what's subjective for $60. Now $70 in the next generation as games are getting more expensive. But for your value add, like how is that really, you know, like in and you put a lot of time and effort into the campaign for sure, but like Call of Duty's cosmetics are not cheap.
No, they're not.
They are not cheap. You can spend $20 on a single pack for a character skin, 2 gun skins, and like a watch.
Yeah.
You could very easily burn a lot of money that's not even connected to the battle pass. Like their microtransactions are rough, which is fine, because their intention, the only problem with it is that intention is for Warzone, you know, which is a free to play thing. But if you bought the actual game, you're kind of getting screwed over, because you have to pay just as much as everyone else, but you've already paid $60.
Yeah.
And that campaign's not worth $60. And it's funny because I've been kind of advocating for this for a while. I've like since Modern Warfare 3, I was like, I really like that campaign, but honestly, I would have preferred if I could have paid $40 for the multiplayer and not had paid $20 for that campaign. And even in Black Ops, I love the Black Ops campaign, but it would have been really cool if I could just. And it's interesting because I think for a long time, my opinion was that they wouldn't have ever done that, because very quickly you would have realized, oh, nobody plays the campaign, so they would have stopped just making campaigns. To a degree, probably. Maybe they would have redesigned and come back and made larger campaigns and stuff like that. But maybe going forward, that might be what they do, right? If Warzone's a sign of anything, it's that people want to play like Activision's take, essentially, even though there's different studios involved. There, from what we know, is Warzone's going to evolve with every Call of Duty. So Activision's take on like multiplayer shooters, whatever way they decide to do it, and I'm going to be interested to see how many people buy the next Black Ops, because people bought Call of Duty Modern Warfare for Modern Warfare and didn't necessarily know Warzone was coming, but now enough people are on Warzone. Will Black Ops really get, you know, will it really be that big of a deal for people. I don't know, because people are excited about it. There's definitely a fan base, but I just don't know if you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Like compared to Warzone's success, like people don't, there's not really like the player base for Warzone might not be the same player base that plays a campaign for the next Black Ops.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Like, I'm just wondering with this new, like, the way things are going now, how interested people will actually be in buying Call of Duty if they have an option of playing the clearly more popular piece of it, which is Warzone, for free. You know?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah. I don't know.
maybe will be an excuse for them to sort of put more efforts into. Because the thing is, I like the multiplayer, but it gets it gets repetitive, it gets kind of old, and it might be time for them to reevaluate what their value is in purchasing an entire game from them.
Hmm. I think there are enough like average consumers, like people that are uninterested in Warzone. I think that they're the player base there is like grossly underestimated or understated, because I think that those people, I think that they will buy the next Call of Duty and they will play the next campaign no matter what. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think that Warzone might be a little bit like Warzone's like hugely popular, but I think that it might actually be less so than the actual campaigns, because if it's Black Ops, Black Ops has its own continuum and it has its own um well, I haven't played the last like what two Black Opses, but I stopped playing Call of Duties after like Modern Warfare 3, but
Yeah.
so I'm not really caught up in the story, but I think that people will be interested in the Black Ops moniker um in and of itself. So I think that we might be underestimating just the popularity of just Call of Duty campaigns. Like,
Well, they're popular, but I'm curious because are they popular because they come with this multiplayer experience that people want to play, or are they popular on their own? Like, if you were to sell the multiplayer experience and the campaign themselves, which one would outsell? Because I think it would be the multiplayer. I've known over the years, like I think increasingly so as multiplayers become more of a thing. Like back in the day, I think everyone used to play like the campaign and the multiplayer, right? But
mm,
it seems to have become sort of increasingly the case that people will buy these games like Battlefield. I never played Battlefield 1's campaign. I wanted to, but then I realized no, I kind of don't.
yeah.
And I just play in the multiplayer. And there's a point where like they clearly put more effort into the multiplayer, and it's not that the campaign's not great, because I actually think Call of Duty is one of the few like franchises like this that does kind of they do produce a consistent product, and there's definitely the player base for that. Like I do know one person who buys it and doesn't play the multiplayer, which is beyond reasoning for me. You're gonna pay $60 for that campaign, even though it's good. But hey, if that's what they think it's worth, that's what they think it's worth. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
But we'll move along here. Julian, you want to tackle this next one?
Yeah. So on this, what we're gonna be talking about here is the Ghost of Tsushima game that, of course, that has probably been all over everyone's news feeds, and actually how big of an impact it had as far as sales went. We kind of it actually managed to break a couple of open world action game records, as it sold 2.4 million copies within the first 3 days of launch. Therefore, of course, making it the fastest IP or original IP that Sony has had in a long time. That record used to belong to Horizon Zero Dawn, and now this record puts it ahead of Bloodborne, Days Gone, and Knack. Greatest game of all time. And of course, it's still a little lower than what other first party titles we've seen like with Last of Us Part 2 that launched in June. I think it sold about 4 million copies in 3 days. But the fact is that as far as it being an original IP and it sold that many copies is quite impressive. I've had my friends do nothing but rave about that game, talk about what an amazing product it is. And for myself, I've been meaning to get it, and I want to get it, but I'm still working on that. But I think it's interesting because I remember seeing games like Sekiro when it came out back in 2019, how it sold over like 2 million copies within the first 10 days. And to see almost 4 million sold within 3, I think is literally like night and day of how much the game has been sold.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
mhm, yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a huge number, and with the PS5 coming in, chances are it's going to end up getting redone for the PS5. And chances are it's probably going to sell even more copies for the PlayStation 5. So I'm genuinely excited to see what the future holds for Ghost of Tsushima, as successful as it's been.
Yeah.
But other than that, what do y'all think? Do you think we're going to get more sales than PS5, or you think it's going to kind of be stagnant, or do you think we're going to get more content, or what do y'all think?
Well, I don't know if it's coming to PS5. I think it might stick to PS4. I was hoping it would come to PS5, but it looks like it's just going to be a PS4 title, which is going to be like it's going to be a really good like sending off for the PS4, because the PS4 got, if you own a PS4 right now, you get to play Ghost of Tsushima and The Last of Us 2 like in the last like what we're like in the third quarter of the year. So yeah.
Alrighty. Why? What do you think?
And
I actually have the opposite take, which is it will be coming to PS5 because they have actually announced that they're pushing PS4 titles forward to PS5, at least select ones, and by that I'm taking that they mean they're marquee titles. They're the important Sony first party titles are going to be the first ones, similar to how Xbox, when they were bringing 360 and original Xbox games to the Xbox One, you saw the quote unquote most important titles first, right? You got the Halos, and then you got the Gears, and whatever else they had. And then you had things like Call of Duty and stuff like that. So like Black Ops was one of the first titles that was pushed over, and I remember that because like when it happened, I went and played it to play some of the Black Ops Zombies again, and so we do know that there are going to be PS4 titles coming to PS5 with the intention of like at some point they want the library to sort of be synchronized as much as possible, similar to how Xbox One, a large number of what the important titles were for 360 and original Xbox are playable on Xbox One.
well, is it like a port, or is it like backwards compatible? Because
so
eh,
for a lot of them, for a lot of the it's going to be up to the developer is one thing. Similar to the Xbox One, like when games, so like when Red Dead came to Xbox One and it was going to be on the One X, the Rockstar had to enable it to be able to run at 4K. Right, like they had to go in and do that. The onus was on them. Similar to like the onus is on the developer to bring these titles over to PS5 in the first place. The thing is that when you're a Sony-owned studio, I think it's inevitable that you're going to be pushed over, and I do think that they would not do this without taking advantage of making it look better on PS5. The thing is, from PS3 to PS4, we saw The Last of Us and then The Last of Us Remastered, right? It was like the better version of The Last of Us. The problem is that actually had to be ported, and that was actually very difficult because of the nature of the PS3's architecture. It was very hard to develop games for PS3 relative to other systems because it was using such a dedicated its cell processor was such an in-house thing that like if you were making cross-platform games, like Red Dead was actually one of those infamous titles where it infamously, and Skyrim infamously ran terrible on PS3, even though PS3 theoretically was the better console, pound for pound in terms of processing power, because it was really hard to write the code for the PS3. Um, but the difference here is that we're just upgrading hardware. We're just adding better graphics card and better CPU. They're both x86, even both AMD hardware that are. It's basically the same as if you were getting your computer, replacing it with a better processor and replacing it with a better graphics card. It's the same computer. It's just better now. Whereas it's before, going from one console to the next used to actually be, they're completely different machines, and that's actually why Sony was at such a disadvantage for Microsoft being able to port. Like, Sony still could have put the money in to port a lot of those games over, or even do some kind of emulation over. But the difference now is that PS5 doesn't have to emulate PS4 games like the PS4 would have had to do for the PS3, and that the Xbox One does for the 360 and the OG Xbox. Mm-hmm. This time, they just move them over, essentially. And I think you're going to see, especially the last couple years worth of Sony marquee titles, so Horizon, Tsushima, Days Gone, and Last of Us 2 are going to be on PS5 and going to graphically be better than PS4.
So are they going to re-release the games, or are they going to just simply, like, is it going to be like upscaling, or what is it?
It's probably just going to be a lot of you're probably just going to get 4K 60 guaranteed. You're probably going to get better textures and better lighting. How far they go I think is going to be directly up to the developer, depending on what Sony feels like they want for the project, and like whether this developer's moved on, right? Like, Horizon Zero Dawn 2 is well underway, so there's probably a very small team working on bringing the OG title over to PS5. But something like what?
So it's going to be like kind of like a Ghost of Tsushima remastered kind of thing.
It's just going to be a graphically slightly improved version. The thing is, it's not like the game they made is the game they made. There's nothing about it that will be. There's nothing about the PS5 version that will have been impossible. Similar, like how the new Ratchet and Clank game coming out would not have been possible on this generation of consoles. It has certain technologies in it with like its teleporting and stuff like that it actually could not have been made on current gen consoles in the way it exists now. It's not like it has ray tracing, so that obviously couldn't have been done, but like with the SSD and everything, the way it works just could not have been built. Tsushima won't be like that. Tsushima was obviously already built, and neither will The Last of Us 2. But I do believe that like The Last of Us 2, Naughty Dog being Naughty Dog, you're going to see a game that like I don't doubt that there's going to be ray tracing, and I don't doubt that it's probably going to have things like Sony has actually recently patented, and we'll get to that in a minute, but a type of anti-aliasing super sampling that will let it run at 4K. Like, you could probably play The Last of Us 2 4K 120 frames given the technology that they have coming. But I think you're going to see probably ray tracing come in. You're going to see like a couple of details just graphically that might not have been quite as possible, or maybe we're pushing the PS4 to its limits the same way like The Last of Us 1 pushed the PS3 to its limits.
Mm-hmm.
But
all right, well, that's pretty much it as far as that goes. I mean, are we excited to see like games like God of War and like Spider-Man? I mean, I think Spider-Man was already set for a remaster towards PS5, because I know they were using that as a demo to explain the SSD. But I'm excited to see what the PS5 holds for us as far as like remasters go,
mm-hmm.
and then the games that come along with it.
Yeah, I do think so they've kind of like softly confirmed. I completely forgot about Spider-Man, but I do think that they are working on that one pretty heavily too. I think when Miles Morales comes out, I think they might also re-release the original one, because The thing that was interesting is they were demoing it to show the PS5, but he specifically mentioned that it has not been optimized to utilize the SSD yet. It is just running on the SSD. So he was just kind of saying, like, he was like softly confirming, like, they're gonna improve it, but this is actually just what it looks like if we just directly ported it over. Which is, again, that thing is like, all games can and would, all PS4 games can and would be ported over to PS5 if the developer wanted it, and without any action on the developer, can be run better and look better. Similar to what Xbox is doing. Like, they've already said, even if the developer doesn't do anything, as long as they accept moving their game over to Series X, the Xbox can automatically turn on 4K 120 FPS for any game that can push it, or 4K 60 FPS for any game that can push it. So the developers for these next consoles don't even have to go into all the effort that porting normally does, because it's literally like, if you were to fire up, if you bought a new graphics card and you were going to fire up, like Knights of the Old Republic or something like that, you just crank that baby up to 4K, run it at 120 frames easily, because that's just what you can do. And these consoles are so much like PCs now that the same is true for them in that sense. But to still kind of stay on the Tsushima topic, even though
can I actually do this one?
Oh yeah, you want to grab it?
I don't actually know what the details of what the Final Fantasy one coming up is about, so
okay,
I don't really understand. So Ghost of Tsushima, the director of the Yakuza games, let me find his name. What is his name?
Oh,
Mr. Nagoshi.
Toshihiro Nagoshi, yeah.
Toshihiro Nagoshi. There we go, right at the top, I missed that. It's Ghost of Tsushima is a worldwide hit, but it's been well received in Japan, which I think is great because it's set in their country. But it's, he says, to be honest, we're beaten. To be honest, we Japan, we're beaten, he replied. Of course we're losing, honestly. I think it's a game that should have been made in Japan, which I think is, in order for him to admit that, I think is very telling of the game's like quality, because it was made by a Western studio, and they obviously did great lengths to research and talk to professionals and scholars and stuff about the history of Japan and stuff like that. And he says that there are some like inconsistencies, as like when it was in terms of like flowers blooming in a certain time and stuff like that, and sake brewing at the time. But yeah, it's still a great game, even regardless. And it's I've played it. I've played like maybe I don't know. I played maybe like 10 hours of it, and I've gotten to the second portion of the island, and because it's divided into 3 portions that you progress through in the story, and it's pretty fun so far. It's a very fresh, no, I wouldn't say fresh take. It's a different take on the open world. It's not in the way that for instance, they have the wind mechanic, the guiding wind mechanic, that guides you to your different objectives. I gotta pause this. I was receiving an annoying ad on the webpage, but it's a very non-heavy-handed approach to guiding you across the island, and there are a lot of things to do. It's not like a game like, let's say, Mafia 2, where it was very empty. I don't know if any of you remember Mafia 2, but it was a very I wouldn't say disappointing game for me, but just it was disappointing in the way that there just wasn't anything to do aside from the main story. Like you could shop for clothes and stuff like that, and make Vito look different, the main character, but that was about it. And you could buy guns and stuff. But in Ghost of Tsushima, there's as you progress in the story, you can find different duels across the island. You can duel people. Straw Hat Ronin across the island. You can find different shrines of Shinto. I think it's Shinto shrines, and it's kind of like there's a certain platforming element to it. You can find different haikus. You can compose haikus on different portions. Like you can compose a haiku on the edge of a lake, and your character literally sits down, and it gives you prompts, and it gives you verses or lines of the haiku, and you can choose between them, and it's really cool. And the whole time, and I've heard other people say this, like I've heard Alana Pierce, she actually said in her video title, "Let's Talk About Ghost of Tsushima," she said that it doesn't make me feel like they're it doesn't feel like they're shoving things into my face of like, oh, go do this, go do that. It's like it feels kind of organic, and I agree with that. And it's a very good game. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see it come to the PS5 and stuff, and especially with the Kurosawa mode and HDR. I really want to get a monitor that supports that. But yeah, and they also recently added, I think actually the day that I got it, they added in lethal mode, which it makes the enemies much more lethal, and it also makes your attacks more lethal. So it's just kind of like a I wouldn't say survivor mode in The Last of Us, because your attacks are also more lethal, but
it's a more honest approach.
Yeah.
It's probably more like grounded in The Last of Us 1, where basically everyone dies to 1 or 2 bullets. You included. And I always find that to be a far better for games like this, and for like The Last of Us. I'm interested to see if The Last of Us 2 do come with a grounded mode, where they kind of retune everything to be that experience, because like for these kinds of interactions, it's not right for every game. But if your game, like in the case of The Last of Us, if your game is about this sort of like how brutal and unforgiving something is, like everyone should experience that, whether it's you experiencing it from taking people down very easily but with a limited supply of resources, or you dying very easily because, hey, a bullet is a bullet, and this is a gritty, realistic survival experience. And in terms of Tsushima, it's like its inspiration is, it holds it very, very clearly in front of you, and it wears it on its heart. It's especially with the Kurosawa mode, it's clear that what they wanted was for people who are fans of it's a love letter to Japanese film, essentially, and old stories and stuff like that. The spaghetti westerns that were originally inspired by old samurai Ronin films, which are very, very, like, I guess you could say dry in their approach to combat, because realistically, Game of Thrones grand battles where they're clinging swords back and forth, that's not how fighting works. Fighting works is 2 people make a move and 1 person made the better move, and usually that's the end of the fight, especially in like samurai battles where their blades are so sharp and their movements are so quick that a lot of people, depending on the period, I know in like that sort of last period where the samurai was sort of the Edo period, I believe, where samurai were kind of being phased out. There's actually a big problem. Like, one of the reasons there's so few samurai towards the end is if you fought with people, especially if you were not like a big problem was that not a lot of them were like masters trained or whatever. It kind of became this gang thing where it was like just a bunch of thugs going around with swords, and they had a little bit of training, and oftentimes both parties would die in a conflict because they would both get cut and wounded, and it like doesn't matter if you win, you don't get to live when you're bleeding out. you know. So it's like
Mhm.
even if you killed the other guy, you might have been nicked too, and it might have been the right artery or area that it just didn't matter. So having these like sort of drier, more grounded approaches to the way things to the systems. You know, obviously there's plenty of like mysticism with the wind and everything, and the Kurosawa mode itself is a dramatic representation for the effect of like looking like an old film. Um,
Yeah,
but that's the contrast, right? You have something that's so gritty and realistic, sort of superimposed on top of this like fantastical setting, and Japan is such a good place for that because they have so much beauty and lore to give.
yeah. They also have like these legends that you can pursue. Um, like there's I can't remember a certain name. They're Japanese names. I can't remember them. I can't pronounce them faithfully, but there are certain legends, and they basically go to a musician, and they'll tell you the legend. They'll sit you down, and then this animation will play. It's beautiful animation, like of Japanese, old Japanese, like ink, like quill and ink kind of illustrations. It's really good looking animations. And they'll tell you the story of a hero or a villain, and they'll point you in the direction. It's like a rumored location on the map where you can go and you can try and retrieve the person's armor, weapons, or yeah, it's really cool. Oh, and I also heard that in Kurosawa mode, it's not just the black and white. It also they actually match like the number of frames they had in those old movies.
Yes, yeah, they put like there's a lot of engine tweaking that they do to make the game run differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, very clear that they put a lot of effort, a lot of research went into this, and I think even like where they're talking about this, like liberties were taken, liberties are taken in everything. I mean, even it's like movies about history, even in Japan or a place that they take place in, aren't necessarily going to be 100% accurate because there's naturally going to be a lot of liberties
A little
taken.
bit of embellishments, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's like for the most part, gravity was realistic. For the most part, was it
Yeah.
possible? Probably not. It was, or rather, it was possible, but was it probable? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is you got to choose when and where you stick to things, and I think it's like it's a hard balance, but I don't doubt that they did the right moves to stay honest to the source.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and but in terms of the realism and stuff, it's kind of odd because the game um there's actually this really cool mechanic they have. It's called standoff. That's called the standoff, and you can literally just you can, instead of stealthing, because the whole thing of the story is that you become the ghost of Tsushima, and it kind of assumes that you're going to be doing the stealthy approach most of the time, but you can completely forgo that, and you can even just like it's, I think it's the up direction, the up arrow. You can press that, and you can challenge them to a duel, and you can just like say, come out and fight me, and you stand off like in an old school like samurai film, and it's whoever makes it's kind of like oh, what's the art where you draw your sword, Iaido or something like that. um
yeah, I believe so. I believe that's what it is.
whoever makes the first move wins, and it's really cool. Like they'll try and bluff you, they'll try and do like bluff strikes, or they'll flinch, and they'll try and get you to go first, and you're supposed to call them on their bullshit, and whenever they do strike, you just cut them down. And then you can get upgrades in the game that lets you do it to more people. There's even the clan armor of your character's clan that gives you like a bonus to it, so you can do it to like 5 different people. Like you cut down one, and then another one will come, and another one, and another one, and another one, and the next thing you know, you killed like 6 people through that process, and it's really cool. Um, but see, there's that, but it's kind of weird, like when in terms of realism, like because realistically, most of the killing blows, most of the killing is done with stabbing, and so it's kind of weird when the game um it's it's hard to tell when it's trying to be realistic and when it's not, because at first glance, when you use your first stance, because you have different stances you use in the game, and you switch through them with different enemy types, because this game plays a lot like Assassin's Creed. Like there's a lot of different enemy types, and they all have their own versions of how to defeat them in combat. Like if you use the swordsman stance against a shield bearer, it won't be as effective in terms of knocking them back, because it's just the wrong stance.
Yeah, typical
And
video game like logic puzzles in the middle of combat.
yeah, but in the first stance, it's pretty straightforward. The strikes are like, they're not like super telegraphed. They're not like, there's no spinny stuff, there's no spinny shit. But then as you get onto the latter stances, you see more of like spinning strikes, and like you give your back to people as you strike them, and it's really, I don't know, it's kind of like as realistic as a video game about a stealth samurai can be. It's hard to tell like where exactly they were going. And you can like deflect arrows with your katana and stuff like that. It's kind of in contrast to the lethal mode. You expect people to go down in one strike, but at the same time you can deflect arrows, and you do these ridiculous like flourishes, and I don't know, it's kind of contradictory. But I would appreciate it if they had gone more with like a grounded approach. But it's a video game. Like they say, they take liberties and stuff like that, and it's just adds for more fun mechanics and stuff like that.
And
I
it's still
appreciate
possible down
the
the line, right? Like the Last of Us 1's grounded mode came later in its life, quite a bit later actually, and there's plenty of time for them to retune with new new styles and directions that maybe it's like, hey, try playing it like this, right?
Yeah. But go ahead.
Oh no, it's just that like there's plenty of time. Like this game came out so recently, there's plenty of time for them to sort of update. I think maybe we should move on.
Yeah.
And the next one, it's kind of a smaller thing. I just wanted to include it because it's kind of baffling. But Final Fantasy XI is getting a new storyline next month. Square Enix will be introducing a new storyline to 11. While the 18-year-old game has continued to be updated with small patches, this is the first time the MMORPG will see a new story content since 2015's Rhapsody of Vana'diel. I know, like, obviously WoW has been around forever too, but like considering that they have Final Fantasy 14, which is also an MMO, the fact that this game, which was on PS2, and I actually played it on PS2, with the like an Ethernet jack plugged in and everything, that this game is still getting content is just absolutely mind blowing. 18 friggin' years.
Yeah.
So and then like changes to like one of the classes and stuff. So I just thought that was kind of cool. Also touch on this next one, which is Grounded hits 1 million players in its first 48 hours. This is, I mean, part of it is not super impressive. It is on Game Pass, so it's like completely free to play to anyone that has Game Pass. So I think that has helped it a lot. That's probably where the majority of those players are, because it is an early access game that I think costs $30 right now. And for the amount of like it's very interesting because people played it and then they were very upset that they paid $30, and there's only like I think like an hour and a half of story content actually in there, and it's like, well, it literally said it was the early access game, so I don't know what people are so upset about. But
Yeah.
even when the story content runs out, you could still play the survival part where you go around cutting down leaves for resources and collecting dew and stuff like that. So you can keep playing the game. It's just the actual written part of the game, the story, is not there for a lot of it, because it's so early in development. But still cool. It definitely caught my eye, and it clearly caught a lot of people's eyes that so many people after its launch and the next 2 days went to go play it.
Yeah. I know nothing about that game. Is it like Rust, or is it a single player game, or is it a multiplayer?
It's a
I know it's
multiplayer game,
multiplayer,
yeah.
but
It's like The Forest meets Honey I Shrunk the Kids. You get shrunk down to it's co-op. From what I know, it's not like PvP. It's a survival resource management game in a shrunk down world where spiders and stink bugs are your enemies and not bears and wolves and stuff.
mm,
But
mhm.
it's novel because it takes a new approach on it. You don't chop down trees for wood, you chop down like blades of grass and build your homes out of them. And from what I know, I intend to play it at some point, but from what I know about it, the way you interact with the world is actually kind of novel because you can kind of build on anything. So like one thing I've seen people do is you can find like there's like soda cans you can just go up to, and someone built a fort in the soda can because the aluminum is indestructible by bugs. So even though like all they really have to build is one wall to block off the entrance, and they can defend it from there from like from the things that would attack them.
Yeah.
So it's a novel thing because it's a new perspective, right? Like it gives you that sort of shrunk down
Kind of like a toy
approach.
soldiers kind of.
Yeah, and like you have to keep up with food and water, but like water, you can't just go like you don't go to a lake. You try and get dews of grass and like knock the dew off and then drink it from the ground because you're so small that droplets literally would be enough water
Probably
for
kill
you.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
But
That's
it's
pretty cool.
just cool. Yeah, and it's cool that they hit it. They have 1 million players, still a lot of people. So even if they don't stick around, it's cool that enough people checked it out.
Mhm.
All right, Julian, you wanna tackle this next one?
Yeah, so right here we're going to be talking about, of course, that Valve cracks down on the VPNs used to purchase cheaper games. And to kind of briefly summarize it, what basically is happening is that people who are VPN users are placing themselves in other countries in order to get regional discounts. Like a game, let's say for example, Left 4 Dead costs $10 in the States, but in the UK it might cost $6. So they're basically placing themselves over there, and what Valve is trying to do to prevent people from doing that, it's kind of smart in a way. And I wouldn't say kind of. That sounds like I'm like big diminishing it, but it's more, for example, like you can't just use your VPN to go to go over there and pretend like, oh, I live in the UK, I'm gonna buy a cheaper game. You would need to use a bank account from a bank that's specific in that country or in the country that you're purchasing from, in order to get that discount. So they're kind of making it a bit more restrictive, whereas it's not so easily to get those games or get these. I think they're key cards or gate keys, something like that. But they're kind of making it a bit more difficult, and I
What they're talking about there is that what a lot of people actually do is they will buy keys for games like for like CS:GO crates or whatever, and they'll trade games through that way. So someone will
yeah.
buy them a game as a gift, and then they'll trade things, or buy games and then trade them back to themselves. So like they'll make multiple accounts, buy things in a different region using a VPN on their other account, and then they'll gift it to their main account. And while it is overall like I mean I can sympathize with Valve just on the sense of like they are running a business and they are beholden to the people. This isn't necessarily just bad for Valve, it is bad for the developers and publishers who put out these games, because if they're getting screwed on money essentially because they have a promotion running in Russia or something, and everyone switches over to Russian servers through a VPN and then gets that game super discounted or whatever, whatever reason, or like the problem is it's a very complicated issue and it's not necessarily Valve's fault. It's similar to YouTube. Like they make their money off of other people's, other companies pay them essentially to have their game on there, and it's like YouTube has other companies invested in giving them money. They don't make money from people having YouTube channels. They make money from advertisers wanting to advertise on people's YouTube channels. and though Valve does obviously make a lot of money from the customers buying the games on there, it's through the grace of the developer actually allowing them to sell it, because it's not guaranteed. And if a developer is saying, "Hey, your users are buying, they're cheating the system and buying our games at cheaper prices. You need to fix this, or we're pulling out of your platform." If it's a very popular game, or even if it's not, I mean, if that's $1 million on the table, it's $1 million on the table, right? And they don't want to lose that. It's very important for them. So it's kind of having to force their hand into this, and it is a clever way of doing it. Although one thing that I remember reading is that it could potentially hurt some people who are like expats.
Yeah,
If you're stationed, the example to give is, if you're stationed in Japan, you're not going to have a Japanese bank account. So if you don't have a choice in being able to, like, now you're going to have to VPN to America to buy your games. Which I guess, hey, at least there's that solution. But yeah, it is an interesting one. I do think, other than that, it is a smart solution. Like, it definitely will affect some people, but for the most part, I think it does solve their problem. Another issue is that, like, and this isn't Valve's problem necessarily, but they're having to sort of deal with the consequences of it. Regional pricing is very real, and though Valve and the developers can have MSRPs, those are suggested, and if things need to go up for Brazil or for Australia, like they do in Brazil and Australia, games are just going to be more expensive there, and it sucks. And that's a local government issue that Valve has no control over, and the developers have no control over. If, like, they could just release their game for the same price, but they're probably paying like 50% more in taxes, so they need to go up that much more. So it's a very complex issue, and I don't think this is the last we're gonna see of maybe this sort of thing. Like, I wouldn't doubt if this is a very unpopular thing and they have to find a new solution at some point, because it's definitely going to affect a lot of people, and it's going to make a lot of people unhappy. And mostly, I think it's going to make people unhappy that are abusing the system for whatever reason that they are, rather than people like expats. But it will also affect people that are, that get caught in the crossfire of this and don't necessarily deserve to be. So hopefully they can come up with some kind of system, like maybe verifying your identity or something. I don't know. It's complicated.
Yeah. Now, want me to take the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, Epic Game Store adds mod support. MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries up first. So yeah, it's just we've seen Steam. They have the Steam Workshop, which allows you to upload mods, and now Epic Store is doing the same thing. So yeah, but the mods in MechWarrior 5, it's improvements to enemy AI, and it can even turn it into a real-time strategy game, which I've never played MechWarrior 5. I'm not familiar with it, but that sounds pretty impressive, And I think
it's third-person action, I believe. MechWarrior series.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's great all around, right? Like, there's nothing but good to come from opening up sort of the doors on allowing developers and players, like the consumers, to sort of interact in that way. I think mods are an objectively positive thing for the industry, and user-generated content is an objectively positive thing for games, and the only people who serve to benefit from them not existing is greedy publishers and developers that seem to think that like other people shouldn't be allowed to make things with their IP, which is within their right. To say like you're not allowed to make and sell this thing, but as we've seen, the games that do embrace it have longer lives. And the problem with, like, especially when it comes to like Nintendo and stuff, when people make, you know, these special versions of Pokemon or Mario that Nintendo would have never in their lives made, the policy is you're not allowed to make that. Like, I mean, Nintendo has a specific problem where they stop people from doing anything because like, at all. Most companies have a policy of like, just don't sell it, right? And that's fine. That's, you know, we're like, I think that's generally a fine approach. I think it's better to say like, hey, we encourage other creatives to take what we have made and see and you know, improve upon it or do what changes they want and even monetize, because that's so much more, you know, like, these things take a long time sometimes. People have generated entire new storyline campaigns with whole new maps for things like Skyrim and other Elder Scrolls titles. These things are very integral to and they're even remaking older Elder Scrolls on more modern engines. Like, they're very integral to the way the lifespan of these games work, making sure that they're fun and interesting and new for players for years and years and years to come. And like, Nintendo has a particularly bad approach to it, because even if someone's not monetizing it, they don't want you to do it. They will DMCA you, take it down, and make sure it's wiped off the face of the earth. Which is really poor, because, you know, it's like, I think Pokemon Uranium was the one. I think there was like this really cool version of Pokemon that changed like everything, and everything was affected in weird ways and stuff like that. And they don't have it, you know. It's like that anytime anyone makes something that's kind of novel that Nintendo clearly would have never made, which is where my issue lies in this, is if you're going to tell someone that they're not allowed to do something because it somehow infringes on maybe money you're going to make, one, if they're not charging money, then no, and two, you were never going to make that product, so no, you know. And even if they're going to do that, I mean, World of Warcraft, not that Blizzard has any good track record of being good to their fans, but they did the same thing with World of Warcraft, where there were WoW vanilla servers that were running forever, community funded, didn't cost them anything for these WoW vanilla servers to be up for years and years and years. Everyone else was paying for it to have this experience that they wanted, and with their shit-eating grins, they took down the servers, DMCA'd it, and then in a press conference told everyone, I know you think you want that, but you don't. And then 3 years later, they released a WoW vanilla server that you could pay for. So I think we've seen that the only time people really say no to things like opening up mod support is typically like either pride or being a greedy asshole.
Yeah.
So generally pretty cool. So this next one's kind of funny. It sad and funny, I guess. But 8 years into development, Star Citizen fans are increasingly upset that Star Citizen is still being Star Citizen. Essentially what that means is that sort of in another wave, again, it's as they're saying, it's kind of weird that people keep getting upset at this game for sort of doing the same thing over and over again. You know, it's slight me once, shame on you. Slight me twice, shame on me. Slight me however many times they've been slighted with this game. Going as far back as 2012, some people have been paying into this and potentially kept paying into this. And yeah, it's just interesting because what the issue is that people are kind of upset. The development hasn't really been happening very quickly. There's not a lot going on, and also, um, what is it? Cloud Imperium, the development studio behind it, has been kind of quiet on updates. They haven't really been following the roadmap that they gave people, and they haven't really been upfront with what's going on. But this again is not really old news. They've been constantly dealing with this issue where it gets to this point where they're like, okay, we've had enough. What's the deal? We're mad. And they're like, okay. Here's a new roadmap. Here's what we're going to try and do. We're going to be more honest from now on. And they do it again and again and again. And now we're here and they're doing it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard some people say that, you know, it's not unheard of for a game this massive for, you know, to take as long as it has to in development.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that people want it now, and you know, it's a huge game, and the scope is massive, you know, and
Yeah.
it's just a money sink right now. But you know, eventually the hope is that it'll pay off, and we'll get this amazing experience that will be, you know, probably the most, if it does actually manage to happen, it'll probably be like the most successful Kickstarter, but not necessarily Kickstarter, but you know what I mean, like, you know, a crowdfunding adventure ever, you know. But until then, it's just people are people, and they're gonna be.
Yeah, I mean, I
patient.
think that's part of the problem too, right? Is it? I do agree. Like games, there are some games that are in development for near decades, if not decades. And whether that's for better or for worse, a lot of times is development hell, which is, I don't doubt, is part of what's happening with this game. Is that it's never, they're usually never so public. Usually you hear about them, they're announced,
Yeah, I was
they're
gonna say that
teased.
they're also very public.
Yeah, they're announced, they're teased, and then they go away, and you don't hear about them for 5 or 6 years, and then it comes back up again, and then you don't hear about them for another 2 or 3 years. And the thing is, yeah, these things, this game is supposed to be massive. It's supposed to take a long time to develop. They've clearly severely underestimated how hard it is going to be to make this game. And another problem is that they crowdfunded. So not only are people like, hey, where is this game? But they're like, hey, I already paid for this thing. Which,
Yeah.
you know, it. I get this game probably would never have existed in any state if it hadn't been crowdfunded. I can't imagine any publisher would have wanted to back this for how expensive it's been and how long it's taken. Without, you know, this studio having any kind of previous proof that they can do this sort of thing. But it just kind of comes to that point where it's like, you know, your investors this time around are the people who already bought your game and all of its individual things along that have spent thousands of dollars or whatever on it, instead of like actual investors who like sit there and wait on things. It's like you're saying, they're just people. They're just people who bought a game, and in my opinion, it's both Cloud Imperium's fault for sort of doing all the things they've done, and also people who have bought into this thing that isn't an existing product yet. I think anytime you pre-order or buy into something that doesn't exist, you're taking a gamble, and you really just kind of have to deal with the consequences of that gamble.
Yeah.
If you pre-order a game and it sucks, should have waited. You know, it's their fault for making a bad game, but it's your fault for buying it when you could have figured that out beforehand. So yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't help that all the quarantine stuff is going on, so perhaps it wouldn't be nearly as bad as it is if we weren't in the situation we are. But they've kind of just been doing this over and over again, so not a lot to be surprised about. Shoot, who introduced that one? Was that you?
No,
it was
you.
me. Okay, so Julian, you want to grab this next one?
Yeah. So to me, this is it is actually really funny to me, only because of the concept of it and the fact that CD Projekt Red has to like stop people from doing this. So what's happening basically is that there are beta scams that I guess emails have been coming out stating that, hey, if you want an early, chance to play the game, go ahead and fill out this information. You'll be receiving a link or something like that, right? And I just think it's funny because it's like, of course, obviously the developers and the publishers are in charge of when the game is going to be released. And I'm sure if there was an actual beta coming out, it would receive way more news than you just get a simple email.
Oh
If there
yeah.
was potentially an actual beta coming out. But I just think it's funny that CD Projekt Red has to come out and say, guys, if it's not from this email, do not trust it. Don't click any links. Don't do anything. And I was even telling Dylan about it. Like, it feels like this is much more like something like kids or like a boomer would fall for, and in the most
Yeah.
respective way. But it's kind of like you cannot take this seriously. There's no way that you actually think that CD Projekt Red's going to release a Cyberpunk beta and it's just an email and there's no coverage of it at all. As this is one of the most anticipated games of this, like of from CD Projekt Red since The Witcher.
Yeah.
And there's no way that you think that, here's a little beta, guys. We're bored. Here you guys go, and that it gets no coverage. So, and even that they've already stated the invites are fake. There's no plans for a beta. If you get an email about it, ignore it and leave it alone. Unless it's from this official email, disregard it altogether.
Yeah, yeah, that's really the thing to take away is like, I mean, because it is emails. I receive a lot of beta invites and beta keys, and hell, I've had Twitter, our alpha keys that I got us for Fortnite were in a Twitter DM. so
Yeah.
these they do come in rather mundane formats. Like, I remember that was the weirdest part, as I was talking with one of the developers on Fortnite, and I was like, hey, can I get some keys? And they just DM'd it to me on Twitter. And similarly, like, my Valorant alpha and beta invites were on an email, and they are rather mundane, they are rather simple. But the thing is, yeah, like, if you're of the uninitiated, and like you have no reason to, like, you're not in contact with anyone and you have no reason to expect an invite to something, one of the main things is, if it's a public thing, if it's a public beta, or even if it's a private beta but publicly announced, that I can't imagine you would ever get an invite via email unless you signed up for one. That's
Yeah.
typically how it works, is they have a sign up sheet, and if you didn't fill one out, you shouldn't be getting one. um yeah, another thing is, like, if you do get something, go look it up. Just Google it. Don't just
Yeah.
click shit when you get an email. That's fucking, we've had this rule since the 90s. Don't click on things in emails you don't know who it's from.
Yeah, my
You-
grandparents do that. That's why the computers are all slow.
yeah, it's such a frustrating thing. Hell, I work at a telecommunications firm, and we have that problem. The IT have to constantly release emails because there's like a someone gets a virus, and it's like bug the whole system, and everyone starts getting emails because they clicked on something, and now they have the entire company, like all of our contacts, so they can just send us all things. Because, and most people don't get it, only people with like outside access can acquire the emails. But it's like, still, there are people within technological industries that are just like so ignorant of how to be safe. And it's
Mhm.
like, just read what you're looking at. Look at the, like, I still get, I don't know who it's from, I don't know why, I still get these emails about my Apple account being, like, purchases being made on my Apple account.
Yeah.
And I've been getting them for like the greater part of a decade now. And not only do I not have a functioning debit card on there, so it's like, if people are buying things on my Apple account, go right ahead, because I don't know whose money you're spending, but it ain't mine. Like, if I get more stuff, that's cool. But I get these
Yeah.
emails all the time that are clearly fake, and you just look at the name, and it's like support.apple.com, but it's suppor dot t apple.com. So the period is, and this is a big thing, is they'll move the period over like one thing over, right? They'll
Hmm.
move it just a little bit over, and I don't know. It's just pretty basic. If you
Yeah,
didn't
Mm,
sign up for something, if you don't know who it's from, don't trust it until you can verify it. And if you can't verify it, don't trust it.
yeah, and
yeah.
if you don't have a cousin in Nigeria who's willing to send you $1 million, then don't believe you have a cousin in Nigeria who's going to send you $1 million. You know, it's like,
Asshole still hasn't gotten back to me.
yeah,
But yeah, that's
But
pretty much it
yeah,
on that one. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
oh no, just yeah, pretty open and closed case of that, I think.
Yeah, it's just please do your research. Again, like I said, if even if there was a beta, I don't think it's gonna be like a little simple email. It's probably gonna be public everywhere. I'd see it blowing up on Twitter, and I know I would because I follow a bunch of gaming things on Twitter.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's
it's
it.
generally if you're not of the initiated where you should be expecting it.
If you're not IGN, Kotaku, or Polygon.
Even smaller people, it's really not hard to get to access to things. It's just like literally if you didn't ask for it, no one's gonna send it to you. Or if you're not like if you're not like a writer of some sort, like those are
Hmm.
the only people that would possibly get something uninitiated, but they'd get it from a contact at a company that they know. That's how it
Yeah.
works. If it's not from a person at this company.com, it's not real.
Exactly. All right, you want to hop on to the next one about EA and Warner Brother Games?
Yeah, so EA hints at possible acquisition of WB Games. Rather large. It would be a $2 to $4 billion acquisition, which is pretty appropriate for the the teams that they have there. NetherRealm Studios, obviously. Mortal Kombat, Rocksteady, the fucking Batman games. TT Games, whom I'm not familiar with, although they say Lego, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones. So
Wait,
potentially
it,
that's. Huh?
isn't TT Games the Telltale Games?
Oh, right. Right. I forgot they still technically exist even though they went under. So that is Telltale
Yeah.
Games. Okay, yeah. So I see Game of Thrones, Batman, and stuff like that. So yeah, basically,
hmm,
um, shoot, I wonder if they're actually working on anything now that they're reacquired. Telltale, and then Montreal. Um, so, which I think Montreal is the one that makes the Lego franchise, which are obviously huge. So, in general, this would be a very, very big deal if this acquisition went through. And with my personal opinion of EA, I am just actually not that interested in this being real,
yeah,
or in that it actually happens, because those are some very beloved franchises of mine, and I just have no interest in seeing EA be responsible for it.
yeah. Some people are saying that they're gonna ruin it. They're gonna ruin the companies if or the developers if they do acquire them. I know they've been trying to acquire what is it, Warframe? I can't remember their um what is the Warframe developer?
I always mix
Digital
them.
Extremes.
Yeah, I was gonna say I always mix
Digital
them in Cloud
Extremes.
Imperium for some reason.
Yeah, Digital Extremes. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like it's day and age where EA is seen as a bad guy, you know, and it's kind of funny, but I don't know.
I
It
think
doesn't have to be bad. Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
I was like I think it would just whether or not they do acquire. I know that I think in the and they said that there were other potential buyers as well, that were looking into it. I mean, there was Jedi Fallen Order, which seems to be one of the better games that EA has released. But I think for a long time, because like I said, EA has always been the bad guy. I think it's because they're more focused on putting out like I guess cash grabs rather than actual quality content. And that's what, of course, and I don't blame people for being worried about it because I'd be worried about it too. I love the Arkham series, and I would hate to come back to it. And if I want a certain thing, it's going to cost a certain amount of money. It's things like that. They have a bad rap, is all. But maybe they'll turn it around, or maybe, but we'll have to wait and see on that. That's even if they acquire it. There was just a hint that they were looking to acquire it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and similarly, there's also it's also reported that Activision, Take Two, and Microsoft are all also interested, but EA seems to be the most interested, and they definitely have the money to front it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a possibility. I guess any of them technically could, but EA is probably the most likely, and has probably offered them the most money for the acquisition. The thing is, it all depends. These things are variables. They come and go. We have seen sort of this era where EA and Ubisoft have come specifically as not to sort of diminish maybe some of the things that Take Two has also done in their own skeezy ways. But like EA and Ubisoft have obviously kind of reached these sort of pinnacles, especially where they become these giant memes in sort of the gaming sphere of like these sort of totalitarian rulers who are like, we're giving you money to make a game, so we will tell you whatever we want, which is what the privilege of being a publisher is that you give someone money to make a game, but you expect certain things along the way. And the problem that I think we've been seeing happen is that EA is a little bit too much focused um, on certain things that maybe aren't within the interest of gamers. And again, I
Mhm.
understand to some degree these are businesses. They have to make money. They are funded by people who want to make their money back. So they have to um, be beholden to the people that give them money to make the product that they want to make. The problem is when the money becomes more of a concern than the product itself. So whereas like they have these the big thing is like EA what is the group testing called? I forget. Like whenever they just huh?
Go ahead.
Oh, just whenever they get a bunch of people, like random people together, they show them a product and they're like, "What did you like about the product? What didn't
Oh,
you like about the
um,
product?"
I can't remember what it's
There's a
called.
certain name for like that kind of testing, right? You
Yeah,
know what I'm talking about, but
yeah.
it, anyways, like yeah, like doing this bubble chamber sort of thing, and they're pretty infamous for doing things like that, where it's like they clearly whoever and the problem comes down to like that balance is fine as long as you have someone at the head who knows how to explain to your investors why this studio should be like tell the studio, hey, we want to give you this money to make this game, we think this is a good idea, um, come to us with what you think is a reasonable expectation of time to make this, what you we can expect out of it at the end of it, and I'll take that to the investors. And it's it should be, I think, whoever is the middleman, whoever EA's middleman is between investors and developers, it should be that guy's responsibility to explain to investors why this is something worth putting money into and being patient on, and not being the middleman who takes what the investors want and tells the developer, you need to do this. Obviously, to some degree, he should also be the guy who says, when a developer comes to him and says, hey, we want $1 million to make a game, or we want $10 billion to make a game that's going to take us 10 years to develop, he's going to have to say no. So there's a balance there, but I think what the problem that they've had is they've been a little too more focused on taking what the investors want, which I get because they're giving them money, but compromising on the product to make them happy essentially.
Yeah, it's the whole thing on why games are released. Like, even if the game is not complete, they'll still release it because that was an like a release date that was agreed by the investors or the executives, and that's why the game comes out like half baked because I've always seen that, and that's why, like, oh, like we'll release the game and then we'll just put a big old patch to kind of fix the last minute things, and then we'll just patch it along the way. And that's what, again, like I said, there has to be like a good flow of communication to where the investors understand, yes, this game might take 4 years, but the result is going to be tremendous. Versus, we took a year to build this game, and now we have to fix it. It's like an early access for the next decade because we're still trying to fix it, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, very very
I mean,
much so.
It works, and I do agree with you. I think there needs to be a middleman who can talk between them, who knows how to talk to investors and how to talk to developers, and literally be that perfect middleman. So I agree. Oh, sorry, my
Yeah.
cat
So,
came by.
Dylan, you want to tackle this next one?
Yeah, sure. So Sony has patented a DLSS-like machine learning image reconstruction technology. So basically, what that means is that we're alongside techniques like temporal upsampling, checkerboard rendering, and DLSS 2.0. Um, High quality images can be produced with non-native pixel counts, and as reconstruction technologies continue to improve, native rendering will quickly become irrelevant. And essentially, the patent, it was in Japanese, but there's an English abstract from the document.
We
And
don't have to read that. It is kind of very broken. It repeats kind of the same thing over and over again.
but
Yeah, go on.
yeah, they could potentially create effective image reconstruction, an effective image reconstruction solution, and this basically allows them to be able to hit that 4K resolution and achieve higher frame rates in their games. I don't really understand technology all that much. Maybe Wyatt, you want to talk about it?
Yeah,
Because I
so
don't.
no, yeah, that's fine. So I don't understand quite how temporal AA works, the TAA. I know a little bit about it, but I do know quite a bit of DLSS, which is a current technology in um, the RTX lineup of graphics cards from NVIDIA. So like the 2000 series and the 3000 series are going to be having this, and moving forward, I think this is a very interesting announcement because like what we've been seeing for the longest time is, and it is true, the Xbox Series X is a physically more powerful machine. It will just out of raw capacity be able to make games look better than the PS5. That is just going to be a fact. But Sony is showing that they've been thinking a lot around the box in ways that it doesn't actually matter to have the more powerful hardware. Um, and so things like the way they have like hardware encoded data decompression for their SSD, for their ridiculously fast SSD, and things like this are going to be very interesting tells. So the way DLSS, which stands for Deep Learning Super Sampling, for anyone that doesn't know, super sampling is when you take, say you have a 1080p screen, so you can only actually physically run an image at 1080p on your monitor. However, you could potentially watch a 4K movie on your 1080p monitor and it will still look better than a 1080p movie. And the same is with games. There's, even if you only have 1920 by 1080 pixels on your screen, there is more detail in that image than would have been from a native 1080p image. So, and that's called downscaling. So that's pulling it down. So super sampling is sort of taking your 1080p image, scaling it up to 4K, and then shrinking it back down to the 1080p screen you're on. And it's about as cost effective as actually just running a 4K image. It's a little less, but it's still very expensive. It's basically like, yeah, if you have a graphics card capable of pushing 4K, you might as well be doing super sampling, because then you could just, even if you have a 1080p monitor, your games will look better. So how NVIDIA's DLSS, the deep learning super sampling, works is it has machine learning AI that takes a lower resolution image and reconstructs it based on what it like, based on like a bunch of metadata and what it thinks and knows that the image should look like. And so what we've been seeing in DLSS has been very promising. So if Sony actually has a similarly performing or potentially even better performing technology on their hands, they've
No, get
shown.
down.
Oh,
I'm
uh,
sorry, my
no,
cat was being dumb.
you're fine. If you go like a good resource for understanding this is if you go to Digital Foundry's explanation of DLSS and showcase of DLSS, you can see it in games like Death Stranding and games like Control where they have the DLSS there, and it's actually very very competent in terms of what it can do. So they've shown that you can take a 1440p image and upscale it to 4K, and again, because this is AI that is reconstructing the image, um, there's actually points where it will look better than the actual native 4K. Because say something like hair, right? Hair is very hard to render with pixels because pixels are dots and hair is this fluid, curvy thing. It's not just like straight lines. It goes in every direction and it's like strandy. Um, and so even if you got something as good as a 4K image, you're just increasing the amount of pixels are there. So when you zoom in on hair, it's still kind of jaggy. But if you're using AI, the AI is actually saying, "Oh, this is a curve," so it's reconstructing the image in a way that just actually fills it out more realistically. And so what we're seeing is when you reconstruct an image using the AI, it actually looks better than the 4K image while only costing a little more than running it at 1440p. And similarly with like 1080p, you can get a comparable looking image to the 4K by running a game at 1080p using DLSS, and scaling up to 4K without needing a graphics card that's more powerful than has to push like a 1080p image. So essentially what it means is that you can get much better looking images with much weaker hardware. And I think going forward, I think I might have talked about this either in our previous episode or in something else, but this is definitely one of those technologies. Kind of going back to the Halo thing, a lot of what we're going to be seeing with this next generation, while graphical improvements are expected to come, I think people's expectations of how much better graphics are going to look are unfortunately wrong. We've kind of hit this point where graphics look pretty good, and it's kind of hard to go past it. It's more about stylistic choice nowadays, and of course, we can always add more like lush trees and interactive fluids and stuff like that, and that's all coming. But a big part of this next generation of technology is going to be things under the hood that make games like sort of run differently, and this is one of them where if Sony's DLSS actually works well enough, they could probably their games could potentially run way better and look better than Xbox Series X's if Xbox Series X doesn't have that thing, because resolution is one still pretty much the hardest thing to run. Just pushing more pixels is very performance hungry. Even from 1080p to 1440p is a pretty significant, like on my 1070 is a pretty significant chunk of, like it takes almost 50% of my frames away sometimes, and depending on the game.
Yeah.
Resolution is still pretty much the most expensive thing to run. Like turning up the post processing or the lighting doesn't really do anything for my frames like in Call of Duty. But going from 1080 or going from 1440 back down to 1080, I can have all the graphics settings maxed at 1440, and then I can turn them all the way down to the bottom, and I get about 15 frames. If I go from 1440 maxed settings to 1080 max settings, I gain about 63 frames.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty much double. It's pretty much double what I'm getting at 1440. So solutions, and obviously it only gets worse if you go up to 4K, right? It just goes down and down and down. So solutions like this, where they could actually be running images technically natively at a lower resolution, but it upscales through machine learning to a higher resolution and looks as good or better. And again, I encourage anyone to go look at Digital Foundry's showcasings of this, because they're pretty definitive how well it works. And there are some things, but there are some times where it doesn't look as good, or it just like doesn't really work, like certain lines or certain textures or whatever. But for like 90% of what you're actually going to ever notice, it's an equally or it's a comparable or better image. So it's very interesting because yeah, like everyone's been kind of like, there's not a lot to talk about when you don't actually have these consoles in hand. So one of the things people talk about is, hey, the Xbox is just more powerful, which it is. So um it's gonna be interesting kind of coming forward based on what we've seen at because we saw a little bit of in-engine running stuff with like Horizon 2 and other games in that showcase, and those games looked incredible. Like the trailer for Horizon 2 looks amazing, and if it actually is being run in real time on a PS5, you have to wonder at 4K is it actually going to be able to do that in game? And if they have something like DLSS, I think they can. So I think the power difference between the consoles we're gonna find is gonna largely be meaningless if this technology comes to fruition.
Yeah, it's a really great innovation. This stuff always fascinates me. I don't really understand it, but it's deep learning. What is it? Deep learning,
Super sampling.
super sampling. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of the general thing is like it's getting into the point where like definitely technologies are advancing to a point where because just better graphics, I think everyone can generally understand having a faster CPU, having more cores, more RAM, easy things to comprehend. Even overclocking, where it's like you're literally just giving it more electricity. It's the same as if you were giving more gas to a car. It makes sense that it goes faster. But you get to these things where they're very complicated and you have to be so smart. I can't like how smart the people are that are working on these things. Like these people could probably be curing cancer. Like if we're not to diminish what they're doing here, but like that it takes a very brilliant person to even invent this technology, let alone maintain it,
Yeah.
and advance it forward. And that's the thing is the next generation of games, and I've talked a little bit about this before. The differences we're going to be seeing in what games are are pretty substantial. The systems and mechanics that define the way games work, you're going to be seeing a lot of AI. This is obviously an AI driven thing, deep learning, but a lot of AI in how games are actually made. AI voice actors, AI stories, AI interactive worlds that like actually change and have this dynamic sort of almost unnoticeably realistic approach to actions you make in the game are coming. There will be certain games that do things where like you might not actually notice that the technology is there because it's working so well. And that's the thing is if these things are successful, you'll never know that they're happening.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just happen. But then one day you'll go and talk to someone about a game you're playing, and they'll be like, "That didn't happen to me at all," because the games are being built in a way that like you can basically have a completely different experience. And I say basically, there's a big asterisk there. Basically have a different experience than someone else, depending on what the game, depending on the specific game and what they're trying to achieve. You can have entirely different dialogues. Potentially, you could have a dialogue that was made by an AI on the fly, and no one ever hears that dialogue ever again. You know, there are things that are going to be potentially possible in coming games that like it's really hard to unlike graphics, like I was saying, or just better hardware, it's really hard to gauge and to measure how these changes come about. But they're just overall gonna be better for games and gamers. So ultimately, good things.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Um, Here we can kind of speed round a couple of these. I'll just help push them through. But
Mhm.
so the next one is Fable is hard to bring back in the same way Star Wars was. Xbox boss says. Xbox's, love this name, Matt Booty
Yeah.
speaks how the new Fable will balance history with trying new things. So the general gist, as we know with how this new trilogy of Star Wars has come about, um, it's pretty torn. I'm not sure that I would have used Star Wars as an example because I think it's a largely I know there's a lot of people that like the new ones, but I think from what I've heard from old fans of it. I'm not a fan of Star Wars, so I'm going based off what I have everyone else to hear. Um, Largely, I think older fans of the series don't care for these newer movies. They feel like they're
Yeah.
disservices, and I do get it. What he's trying to say is that when you're taking an old IP and you're sort of bringing it back and breathing new life into it, balancing, um, you know, not unlike Ghost of Tsushima when we're talking about how there's discrepancies, balancing that sort of the history you're given and being true to your source while also being able to take liberties and push things forward um, is a very difficult act. And uh, again, while I wouldn't have used the Star Wars reference because I think that that makes me feel weary, but I don't think I necessarily need to. I think all they're really trying to say is they want to do something new and fresh with Fable, and that's probably going to upset some people who are fans of the series. I really like the
Yeah.
series. I think it's a great series. I don't personally think I would be offended by too much change in it. There's obviously a point where they maybe go too far, but I get it. It's a balancing act. It's hard to do. Uh,
Yeah.
I want to be hopeful, but I just don't like this. I just hate this article title. It just makes me think too negatively of it with the Star Wars reference.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Well,
you guys ever played Fable or anything.
I never played
I,
it.
No.
I never got to play it, but I do know what it's talking about in reference to Star Wars because I watched the entire like part from the originals to from the prequel. I watched the prequels, the originals, and then the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
So I can kind of see why he's making that like that phrase or like saying that they kind of don't want to do the same thing that Star Wars done, where like Star Wars had a pretty dedicated fan base. Disney came along, added some new, didn't put that much old, and the fans were furious of what Disney did to Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they're trying to be a bit more like we want to add new stuff, but we don't want to piss off the old guys who were in from the beginning,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
I completely understand.
yeah, and even then, at the end of the day, for me, it's like Star Wars is directed to kids. It's a kids show. It's a kids movie. They're meant for toys. They're not meant to
Ooh, that's
be
pretty
thought
contentious.
provoking. Yeah, in my personal opinion. But like I said, I can see why they made that phrase. I don't think it's too negative. I think because I know the Rise of Skywalker was not well received by fans. Critics liked it, but fans like users not a big fan of it. Last Jedi was the worst, apparently. It was a whole thing, but I can see why they chose this title as far as like comparing Fable or trying to bring back Fable in the same way Star Wars.
Yeah. Um. Again, as like a sort of outsider, as someone who's not emotionally invested at all in Star Wars, but has seen all but like the most recent movie. Um. The the things that I notice that about like the things that I understand to be things that are very negatively received by the fan base for Star Wars that I don't like the comparison for is that, and I mean I think it doesn't really equivalate to Fable because I don't think Fable has so much to lose, but like one of the biggest moves that was widely unpopular is the expanded universe, which for Star Wars, which was a very large source of material, books and shorts and all kinds of things written by people all over, published documents that people had strong investments in, complete characters that were made, and story arcs and things like that, that Disney was like, never happened. Fuck all of y'all. Just don't give a shit. Doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then came and made, and I know that was probably like bad move number one. And the only other thing that I know of that like I personally am like, why the fuck, when and I guess a bit of a spoiler for probably like a 5-year-old movie now, um when Leia was like dead in space and then turns into Superman and starts flying, and I'm just like, oh, what?
I never saw that. I don't care to know that, but
yeah,
I mean, I don't really care, but it's like,
it's
I
just
mean,
funny.
yeah.
Again, for me it was comedic as hell, but I'm not invested in it. So for a lot of people, it really pissed them off.
Yeah.
And I kind of understand. But anyways, yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah, hopefully it's not as contentious. I mean, at this point, Fable has been gone so long. I think most people, I don't know, I as a fan of the series, but not like super fan, I'm not really sure what they could do to upset people unless it's like big gameplay changes. Like if all of a sudden you can't do a lot of those open RPG elements that you like you could marry so many people in Fable. You could marry anybody you wanted. You could go and have unprotected sex and get STDs, or you could choose to use a condom and you won't get STDs and you won't get anyone pregnant. And you can have kids with people, and you can get divorced because you were like, you put them in a house and you never visit them, and then they divorce you because they're unhappy. There's in Fable 2, there's this part where you go away for 9 years and you don't know what's happening until you do the mission. It's part of the main story. You get sent to a prison island to go save somebody, and you're gone for 9 years and you don't know what's happening. So if you don't talk to your wife or husband before you leave, they will have assumed you just fucking left for 9 years and divorce you and leave, and your house will be gone. And every that whole everything you did, like, they'll just be gone. Your kid will be gone. That happened to me. Is my wife took our kid and just left, and I was like, I didn't fucking know that was gonna happen. But you know what, it's cool because that's what would happen if you just disappeared for 9 years. So I can see, like, maybe if that goes away, like liberties like that, things where this open RPG element stuff happens, if that were to go away, I could understand maybe that hurts a lot of people. But other than the story is like so loosely fit, I can't imagine that super similar. But we'll see. I don't know. This next one, we'll just briefly touch on this, but essentially big publisher showcases did not suffer from the absence of E3. That's essentially to say that the online viewership numbers were quite higher than E3's were. And so for major publishers, but the PC gaming show's audience was down compared to last year. So things like Microsoft and Sony's showcases over the course of these things, Ubisoft, and I don't know if EA did one. If they did, I don't think I watched it. But essentially just saying that, like, I mean, people are just tuning in, right? And I think this is something that was sort of inevitable. We've talked about this before, but we're going to sort of see a trend of the media for video games doesn't really need to culminate in these massive conventions. And not that they're not still important. There's a lot of business that happens at these conventions. These conventions are very important for the actual industry. But I think when it comes to, like, fans viewing things, I think physical representation is far less important than maybe people were holding it to be for a while. I actually thought it was kind of interesting that it took E3 so long to open up to the masses, when we were kind of coming to this digital age where who wasn't tuning in to E3 every year, right? Like to some degree, online. You know, most people weren't attending it. Most people were just viewing it online. So makes a lot of sense. It's still good to see the numbers. So from E3 2019, 0.75 million to the Ubisoft 4 that just happened this year, 1.02 million. The PS5 reveal had 1.5 million people. Xbox E3 briefing in 2019 had 0.94 million. The so like quite a significant amount more. The PC gaming show was down from 141,000 to 68,000, which is interesting. But I think that's probably more indicative, maybe their presence rather than. I mean, it's a little bit affected because I think most people probably wouldn't have watched that show if it wasn't part of E3, and I think that might have been what we're seeing. But I don't know, it's interesting, but I think pretty much in line with what I was expecting of like what this quarantine was going to cause for people and viewership of online content.
Hmm.
Um, do you wanna tackle this next one? Who was next? Was it Dylan?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Hideo Kojima and Junji Ito are, well, they might be in cahoots in making a new horror game. Junji Ito was asked in the Comic-Con 2020 interview if he was currently working on a video game project, and he says maybe. All he says is maybe. Yeah, and Kojima has mentioned multiple times that he has a great idea for, well, he wants to work on a horror game, and he also mentioned last year that he had a great idea for a horror game, and he's even revealed how he's preparing to make it. And he wants to make a revolutionary horror game and stuff like that. And he says that PT Engine is just an experiment, but I would like to make another horror game someday, Kojima
I
said.
I hope to God he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty significant. Like Del Toro, we kind of discussed. Me and Matt were discussing this, but like Del Toro is a very good pick for. And when that was announced, that was like holy crap, right? That's such a fascinating and great grab for a creative like Kojima to be working with. Someone like Del Toro is so famously like good at the way he does his horror that I think is a natural fit. And same with Ito, where it'd be cool to see them both working on this game, theoretical game, and you know Del Toro handles like the sort of overarching narrative horror and things that happen throughout the game, whereas Ito is more of like, you know, PT was so good because of its set pieces and the story was really good, but obviously it was such a small snippet of anything that it was really the unnervingness of these different scenes, like when you're walking through the red hallways and there's all the eyeballs on the wall staring at you, or you go into the bathroom and there's that like, you know, the aborted fetus talking to you in this like grown-up voice, and then the bag of something that looks like bloody mess talking to you, and all the things that are just like creepy about that. And I think you know it's sort of it's more creepy, whereas like Junji Ito is very very good at making you uncomfortable in your own skin. His type of horror is very shock factor, but in a more like deep in your soul kind of way. It's not like jump out and scare you. It's like, oh god, I can't think about this anymore, or I'm gonna go insane. You know, his famous one is the Enigma of the Amigara Fault, and that one just still makes my skin crawl, like thinking about it, and just how well he sets up these things to make you uncomfortable. He's just a master at it. So yeah, it's funny how he kind of dances around things. He confirms that Kojima is working on a horror game, but not that it's his next game, which it probably isn't. If he's just in talks like this. So and we do know, right? Like to some capacity, Kojima has been interested in and has been sort of playing around with um, a horror games. So all this really confirms is that maybe he himself is writing something. Maybe no one else on his team is, or maybe he has 3 people working on it and just coming up with concepts while the rest of the team is working on his next big game. So we don't really know much of anything, but we know it'd be very interesting. And that Kojima is even interested in pulling Ito into this is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Joel, you want to grab this next one?
Yeah, we'll grab this last one here, and then I gotta get going.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know we have, of course, the Avowed gameplay, which I believe was during the Xbox Live showcase. I want to say for sure. I'm not 100% sure. Of course, like, as I mentioned before, I wasn't able to watch it,
Yeah.
but it is set, and of course, in the Pillars of Eternity, it's open world, which gets me excited, and it has mod support, which makes me even more excited. I just cannot wait for this to come out, and even just seeing whatever snippets they had of it during the like whatever I saw on Twitter and YouTube, it looks incredible, and I am so ready for this.
Yeah, so I'll kind of read through this list that he provides and like kind of briefly touch on it. Overall, what I'm seeing from this is like similar to what Obsidian did with the Outer Worlds. They kind of proved that they can do Fallout. I mean, we've already seen them, right, with New Vegas. They could do Fallout better than Bethesda can. And then the Outer Worlds came out, and we're like, oh, they really can do Fallout better than Bethesda can. Even if they're not super comparable, it's similar enough that there's like they just prove how much better they are at this. And maybe Bethesda has the potential, but they've just been resting on their laurels. So this is really interesting to me because of the way they all the snippets that this guy has gotten. And again, these are leaks, so they're rumors, but this guy has a pretty good track record with it, and supposedly he has like essentially first party sources. So it's gonna be a fully open world, much larger than Skyrim, very differently, quote unquote, larger. More proper word would be denser and more contrasted at the same time. So I think similar to how like in The Witcher, that like really big city of theirs like just has so much stuff, right? And generally like there's just more things to do per square mile, which I think is generally this note is not necessarily impressive in and of itself to me because I wish I had it here, but if you compare Skyrim is smaller than most modern RPG maps. It just is. I think the pinnacle being The Witcher 3, and then like Breath of the Wild is the next one down, and then Horizon Zero Dawn. Or sorry, no, Breath of the Wild is smaller than Horizon Zero Dawn, and Horizon Zero Dawn is just a little bit smaller than The Witcher 3's world. But like Skyrim is like way down there.
Yeah.
Skyrim is not that big of a map. And it's funny because like for a long time Bethesda was lauded as this thing where, you know, it's okay if they didn't make that quality of games because they're so large, but we have so many games now that can prove not only can we make bigger games than yours, but they have more stuff per square mile and they're just better games. So I think it's just another case of someone else coming along and being like, hey Bethesda, you should have made this but you didn't. It'll be primarily set in the Living Lands region of Eora, which is, if you know Pillars of Eternity, which I don't, but since I'm so interested in this game, I'm probably going to check it out because I do know it's a good franchise. The big focus will be on world reactivity, and this is a little bit of what I was talking about. There's going to be a lot of systems in place that react to you as a player in such a nuanced way that it feels like the game was written to do that, or like scripted to do that rather. Lighting and next generation AI systems and physics, and he puts in parentheses, special focus on physics with magic systems. Have no clue what that would mean. I think what that means is we're gonna see like actually physics driven like kinetic magic. And one of the things he talks about next is real-time weather system. Don't have full details, but fog is very important as a real-time element. Rivers will have specific microphysics systems regarding this. So so I think the magic is going to actually take like you're going to have like magic that can like physically pull water out and hit people with it, and like physics are going to be important to like creating storm systems and like maybe grabbing trees and like high winds and knocking them into people and stuff, right? So I think that's really cool. The potential for that. Very advanced character creation tool. Character creation tools these days are pretty impressive, so don't doubt that. Mod support for now PC is / will be very dominant as a creation tool, but it'll be fully playable on Xbox. He says very large number of fractions, but I think he means factions.
Yeah, that's what I got.
But with very different approaches than Skyrim. So that's cool. Again, this is another thing that's happening is games are going to have a lot of like factions. I think this is gonna be a little bit of a thing you're seeing in open world games over and over again. Is they're gonna have multiple factions that can dynamically sort of interact with each other and with you, and depending on who you help more than the other, certain ones will like you and not like you in a bit of a dynamic way, especially if they slight each other. Like, so you might even start the game where these two factions are fine, and you're helping them both, and they're fine with you helping them both, but then they have like a conflict, and now they don't want you to be partners with each of them, so you have to choose. And whoever you choose, you're going to obviously make an enemy with the other people. So you're going to start seeing some of that happening. You'll be able to have companions. It says different than Outer Worlds, so I don't really know what that means. It's kind of interesting. The story set will be that you're fighting against an incoming threat of tyranny, independent from previous stories. So I guess there's been tyranny before. So you're probably some kind of rebellion maybe against it. The game has bosses planned, and some of them are very, very large. And then following that, gods will have a special say in the game. So I don't know how far to read into that, but potentially you'll be fighting gods. There's a great focus on iconic landmarks, statues, and buildings. I love the idea of that. Environmental storytelling. Give me a reason to love the map. Like it, I love games that Horizon was very good about this. I almost never opened that map. I never fast traveled until like the last 10 hours of a 90-hour experience that I had with it. I went on foot or on robot horse everywhere, and I could tell where everything was at any point based on my location just by looking for like a specific mountain range or like where the coast was. Like I could just, that game was so readable. The topography was so great that I'd love to experience that again. A game that I could just walk through, right, and understand and just feel where I'm at is really good. 2 large cities planned with many smaller ones, with a strong focus on contrasting wild areas, rivers, mountains, and desolated areas. Again, just variety of landscape. Very good. For some reason, in parentheses, it says, yes, you'll be able to swim. Maybe that's not a Pillars of Eternity thing. Not really sure. Fully respecting the Pillars of Eternity creatures lore with new additions. Dynamic presentation of dialogue. Again, like I was saying, things will change depending on what you do and what you say, and you'll have sort of super dynamic responses that don't necessarily have to be written in a studio by someone and spoken in a studio by someone. For now, the idea is to keep you can kill everyone in the game option, which I like. I always appreciate games that you do that. Outer Worlds lets you do that. Around 100 people are on the project for about 2 years, a smaller number for about 7 months of pre-production. In total, it has been in production for 2 years and 7 months and is currently in full production. The team will still grow, and the target date is late 2022 or early 2023. So, I don't know. I can be nothing but excited for this. Obviously, we'll see what happens, but I just think Obsidian is going to become someone who kind of blows expectations out of the water with the future of gaming in general. And look, we haven't seen the Elder Scrolls 6 yet. So maybe Bethesda realizes that they need to stop sitting on their ass, and maybe they're going to step up to the plate. And God, I hope so, because I would love a reason to like a game from them again. At least Bethesda Core, not like id Software or anything. But yeah, y'all got anything to say about that, or
No, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
yeah?
Took the words out of my mouth, man. Like
Yeah.
and I don't blame you for being excited because I'm excited to. I literally just downloaded the Outer Worlds yesterday because I'm excited to play it and I want to
Oh,
see
dude.
what Obsidian's about because I never got to play Fallout New Vegas or any of the
Really?
previous Fallout.
Oh,
It's
Yeah,
a good
so
game. It's
Yeah.
kind of
I'm
rough. I wouldn't recommend going and playing it now, but but
Yeah, it's better if you have nostalgia glasses for sure.
yeah.
I imagine, but that's why I'm like, you know what, get the Outer Worlds, I'll try it out and see what it is, and then probably get me even more excited for the next game that's coming out.
Yeah,
So
man, dude,
we'll see how it
if
goes.
you like dialogue systems, like if you like interacting with people and talking with people in games, it's so
Mhm.
good. The combat, it's like a little wanting, right?
Mhm.
It's in my opinion better than Fallout's, but still like not that amazing. But it's really not what you play it for. You play
Yeah.
it for like interacting with these people and doing the missions, and the writing is so good. The writing is so good. So I think you're gonna have a blast with it. I think you're gonna have a good time. But yeah, with that, we're gonna end it. That's everything we need to talk about. Thank you very much for everyone who tuned in. We did have quite a bit of people over the course of this, and thank you guys for joining me. We're gonna have
Not
to
a
do this
problem.
again next week.
Yeah, not a problem, man.
See ya.
All right,
All right.
see you guys.
Catch you later.